the amount of languages there are in the world and some general principles and attitudes that are good to have towards them. For example, as you guys may or may not know, how many languages there are in the world. Well, there are approximately 6,000 different languages in the world. Okay, so that's a lot of languages. Now, for us, when we think about the Pacific, what's most important is to think about language distribution. Okay, so out of those 6,000 languages, how are they distributed around the world? Which languages have the most number of speakers? Which languages have the least number of speakers? And for us, I would ask you guys a question to think about which language has the most number of speakers. Okay, well, maybe pause this and think about this for a while because I'm going to give you the answer right now. The answer would be Mandarin with 874 million speakers. Okay, so that's first language speakers only. If we count second language speakers, well, that total jumps into the billions. Okay, well, at least 1.2 billion, somewhere around there. And number two would be, anybody? Spanish with 358 million. And third, English at 341 million people, okay, speaking those languages. So that's a lot of people. Well, the counter to that is that those are languages that have many speakers, but there are parts of the world where you have languages that have very few speakers. Okay, so when we're talking about language distribution, what we're actually talking about is certain parts of the world that have fewer languages but more speakers per language. Okay, so fewer languages, but more speakers per language, versus areas of the world like the Pacific, namely Melanesia, where you're going to have more languages, but less people speaking those languages. Okay, so it's kind of a inverse relationship. Okay, so again, in the Pacific, you're going to find that you have small islands with sometimes hundreds of languages, or up to 108 languages. Like on the island of Vanuatu, there are 105 languages, with a total population of 175,000 people. Okay, so you have a large number of languages, relatively few speakers per language. Okay, so let's get into some what I call the basic features of language. This will help you to understand languages in general. And of course, languages are very important. And there are four basic features. So we'll run through this as quickly as we can. First feature of language or languages is that they're always changing. Okay, always changing. They're never the same through time. Okay, for example, if you went back in time and you had a time machine, the farther you went back in time, the less you would be able to understand your own native language, your own first language. Okay, I mean, think about how you speak in comparison to how your parents speak, in comparison to how your grandparents speak. Okay, there's different ways and phrases and enunciations and all those sorts of things. Okay, people on the continental United States, over on the East Coast, if you went back in time again, 200, 300 years ago, you would perceive them to speak more how like British people talk, okay, in England. That accent came from there, that's why, okay? Same thing if you went back in time in Hawaii. Hawaiian would be different than it is today, okay? And so on and so forth. The best thing, though, is actually for you folks to think of languages as living entities, okay? This is very important. Think about languages as being alive, okay? Languages, just like people, are alive, okay? You can have, think about it, you can have languages that are in varying degrees of health, right? Languages like we talked about a few minutes ago, Mandarin, right, are very healthy languages, okay? Those languages are extremely strong, okay? Well, you can have languages that are not so healthy, and those languages, some of the very small languages that are dying out, okay? If you read that article, Lost Words, Lost Worlds, you'll see good examples of language death, language endangerment, languages that are on the verge of extinction. Okay, Hawaiian was one of those languages. Okay, it sort of came and teetered on the brink of extinction, but now it's making its comeback. Okay, languages can die. Okay, there's many documented languages around the world which have died. Okay, and languages can be born as well. Okay, and we'll see how this works in our Pidgins and Creole section. Okay, um, so number two, on our second basic feature of language, languages are mutually influential. And when I say this, what that means is that languages, like people or anything alive, when they come into contact with one another, will change. Okay, and the easiest way to see this is in language borrowing, vocabulary borrowing, word borrowing, loan words. Okay, all of those things. A good example for English speakers is that you may or may not know that English is actually made up of approximately 40% French vocabulary. Okay, this is a huge amount of borrowing from one language to the other, and it's easy to trace this back historically. Look back to the French or the Norman invasion of 1066, where the French occupied and ruled England and imposed French words. Okay, so that's a very, very easy thing to see. Hawaiian has borrowed from English. Obviously, a lot of our modern things we have, like paper. Okay, Hawaiian language, Hawaiian culture has always been an oral culture. Okay, its words, its mana, its character has been passed on from mouth to mouth, person to person, between generations. Well, when this foreign concept of paper arrived in Hawaii, Hawaiians simply borrowed the sound and introduced the word into the language. Okay, so from paper, we got pepa. Okay, and there are actually rules to determine the input of these words as well via sounds. Okay, and we'll talk about that during the Hawaiian language section, which should be the next audio lecture, I guess you can call it, that's coming up. Okay, likewise with the word book, we ended up with puke. Okay, now those are obviously based on sound. Okay, those are based on sound, what we call phonetics, right? With a word like computer, okay, which is relevant to this class very much, we actually have two different words. Okay, and this will give you an idea as to the different borrowing strategies that languages have. Now, our first word for computer, which thankfully is not the word that is commonly used, is kamepula. So that comes as a direct input from English phonetics, right? Computer, kamepula. Computer, kamepula, right? Easy to see. Well, we also have another word, which is the word that most people use, which is lolowila. Okay, now lolowila doesn't sound like computer, but it's actually based off the function of something. Okay, lolo is your brain in Hawaiian. Wila is electricity. Okay, so if you look those up into in the dictionary, you find that lolowila is actually a composite of lolo, brain, uila, electricity. So it literally means electric brain. Okay, and it describes exactly what a computer is. Okay, and so on and so forth. So word borrowings. Okay, well, like I said, the title is mutually influential, right? This number two, languages are mutually influential. That means that, of course, obviously, that influence is mutual, which means it's a two-way street. Not just one language doing all the borrowing, but two languages together borrow from each other, okay, to varying degrees. A good example of English borrowing from Hawaiian, or let's lump some of the other Polynesian languages together, like Tahitian. We have the word tatau. Okay, tatau has become tattoo. Okay, tatau being borrowed and introduced into English as tattoo. Also, tapu has become taboo. Okay, so tapu, taboo. Okay, now another thing to realize also is that oftentimes the meanings of these words will also change as the result of those borrowings. Okay, so if you imagine one speaker of a language and another speaker of a language standing side by side, right? The speaker of Hawaiian is saying tatau. The speaker of English is thinking tattoo, right? Okay, well, in their heads they have different conceptions of what those words are over time as one language borrows from another. Okay, so I'll give you an example with tatau. In English tattooing, right, Western tattooing, it's body art, ornamentation. You can walk into a tattoo shop and look on a wall and sort of pick out a design that you like, right?